Hi, welcome to our new series on map editing for Hegemony 3. In this series we're going to go over how to build a new map from start to finish and how to publish it as a mod in the Steam Workshop. So we've launched the editor, and many of you guys will recognize the basic terrain patch you start with. Where we're going to start today is showing how to import height fields, which is how we build all of our base maps for the last 3 games we've done. So, in the new version 3.1 of the editor, which is currently out in beta as of the posting of this video, you'll see in the terrain mode, right from the beginning, there's an import height field button. So we're going to click that, and that opens up our file menu. Now, what we've done in advance is download some height fields, and we'll post a link on our webpage for you guys can get your own. But one of the great resources we've got is NASA has released height fields that cover the entire world. Released in latitude longitudinal files, so that's the north 39 east 20. So we've already downloaded a selection of these for our new map, which I will select here. So the game recognizes that we've selected 12 files and prompts me to pick a place to put them on the map. So I'm going to put them right in the corner of our starting patch. You can place them anywhere on the map you want. And you'll see we now have some terrain. Now if we zoom all the way out here, you'll see the new dynamic strategy map that's automatically created in version 3.1. And some of you guys might recognize where we are. This is Greece, soon to be ancient Greece. Specifically, we're going to create this new scenario around the Kingdom of Macedon from the original Philip of Macedon campaign. So, Macedon was in this I covered roughly this area at the start of our campaign. The old capital Aegea was over here, and the new capital Pella was over here. You'll recognize the water line is a little bit different. In one of the things we like to do is we've got a great reference in the Barrington Atlas that actually shows some of the older coastlines in ancient times before a lot of rivers and other bays silted in. So we'll actually be carving this back out to closer to what it was at the time. So we're going to start off, we'll zoom in here and you can see more of the very basic terrain. So you can identify some of the mountains and coastline. But what we're going to start to do is we're going to go into the texture painting mode. So it's the second icon here, and it allows you to add textures to the terrain like rock, grass, etc. So to start off, we're going to use the Latium textures that were used around their Rome in the Hegemony 3 map. So we're going to start with the coastal one. We'll select that and pick a brush down here. Now these brushes, you see some softer edge or larger edge brushes in different patterns. And then we're going to go up to the draw tool, which just lets you draw. Now let's get a bigger brush. So just to start off, we're going to quickly go over all the terrain just to give it a base texture. Now you can see this is painting a few different textures, and all these brushes in the bottom half of the list are intelligent patterns that change the texture based on the slope and altitude of the terrain that's underneath them. So right now we're using the coastal one, which will draw the sand and some grass, and then I'll switch over to the mountain texture and rough in these mountains. So we'll go over more of this in detail later, but this gives us a good starting point, makes the terrain a little more recognizable, which makes it easier for editing. So we'll paint around here. And that should give us a starting point. So I'll switch over to the mountain version. We'll fill in these. You can see it's a little more gray rock appears with that brush. Fill this all in here. A little bit further down. Okay, now we've got basic terrain highlighted. We're going to start doing a little bit of sculpting. Now, one of the things we usually find, usually tend to need to exaggerate a lot of the features. At the scale of our game, most mountains don't appear quite as impressive as you kind of expect them to do. So we're actually looking at Olympus Mons, or Mount Olympus. where the Greeks believed the gods resided. So we're going to make this suitably impressive for the gods to hang out in. We're going to switch back to the terrain tool here, which allows us to raise, lower, and carve out terrain. And we're going to switch from the draw tool to the raise, lower terrain. So in this tool, left clicking will grow the terrain and right clicking will shrink it. Now, this tool has two different modes over here on the right, a draw mode and a scale mode. Scaling allows us to stretch and exaggerate features, so that's what we're going to start with. So let's get a nice big brush here. So we're going to raise up these mountains a little bit. Make them a suitably impressive mountain range. So when we get into a later tutorial, when we get into covering adding movement regions, we don't want any of these mountains. These mountains won't be generally crossable, so we want to make it look like they are uncrossable. So let's here we'll raise these ones up a little bit. You gotta be a little careful with the stretch tool because it can, if you use it too much, can distort the mountains a lot. But with a little bit, you can steeper. If you want to switch back to the draw tool, and there's a few presets here, we can increment by 100 height units. We can let's go up to, so that'll raise them, but without stretching the peaks any further. Give us a little more height without distorting things. Okay. And now that we've stretched that out a little bit, so we got this almost to where it's hitting the strategy map there. Suitably impressive mountain range. We're going to switch back to the painting mode and do a few little touch-ups. First, we'll just go over with the general Latium mountain brush again. Now that we've changed the slopes, you'll see the brush is adapting and painting a little more rock on them. So we can move over that quickly and do a little bit of updates. Alright, and then jumping back down here to Mount Olympus, we're going to go up to the basic gray rock brush, pick a smaller brush and touch up the mountaintops a little bit, because they get some of the flat surfaces up there, pick up a little bit more of the grass than we probably want at that altitude. So I'll just touch that up a little bit. Those peaks. Alright. So now that we've got some mountains, the next thing we're going to look at is our coastline. So you can see there's a lot of noise here. This tends to happen on coastal areas where it's very close to sea level. So switching back to our terrain brush, and we're on the draw tool. So the draw tool sets the height directly to the current level. So right now it's at 0. If you right click with this tool, you can sample the terrain underneath it, which is a handy way of capturing quickly. So I'm going to right click, so this height around here is about 18, 19, and then we will paint right over here and fill in these holes. So you can see this doesn't change the texture immediately. We can we'll update that in another pass. Now one of the other tools we can be using for this part is the smoothing tool, which is this little water drop there. This water, that's handy for smoothing out some of these features as well. Get rid of that. Now we're actually going to carve out more of this water. Remember I said that the coastline, since this is all modern data, includes where the river and lake here have all silted in. So our atlas shows the coastline should actually be closer to where this little mark on the texture is. So we're going to go back to our draw tool, right click on the water. So you can draw up here on the strategy map. It's not quite as responsive. because of slower refresh times just for performance. But when doing really rough edits, that does give you a wide picture. So these edits are going to be really rough right now, but we're going to clean those up later. We're going to probably add in some more, actually recreate some marshes around here. But this gives us a little better feel for where we want the terrain to be. Let's go in here. Now it's hard, without having changed anything, it's hard to actually see where that coastline is because we've softened it so much. So we're going to go back to the paint, go back to our Latium coast, pick a nice big brush, and paint over that again. Let's see, it's changed where our coastline is significantly. It's a little softer coastline now, it's not quite as hard. Going back to the terrain mode, smooth out some of that noise. Alright. So now that we've got a slightly better coastline here, we are going to add some water. So that brings us to the third editing mode in the editor here. So we did terrain, textures, and the third one here is water. So water is drawn on using polygons, which are 3 or more sided shapes. So we're going to go into the draw tool. So when drawing water, you draw the corners of these polygons. So pick one here. You want to surround the water, because this will go underneath the terrain a little bit. There we go. Once you complete the shape, it will fill in the water. So after you've done it, you can switch to these other tools here, the move tool, and select one of these corners, and you'll see a little movement gizmo, as they're called. And selecting this corner here moves it in the X and Y plane, or the horizontal ground plane. And you can drag, select, and select multiple points at once. So with that made, we're going to fill in that little corner. We'll go in and fill in the rest. Do that. Now one trick with it, you can see I made that a concave region. They're actually, you want all of your water regions to be convex. It prevents some problems when the rendering engine. So I created an extra point there, which makes it a little easier for me to split the coastlines here. So I'm going to go in quickly and create some water. Now if you decide you're running into trouble, you can right click and that will cancel your current draw. And the game will try to snap to the automatically to the corners. But if it misses, you can it's easy to redraw it again. There's not too many rules about how big these are or where you want to place them. You'll see the little arrows in the middle. Those are the direction of the water. So one of the reasons you might want to divide up the terrain is to control how the water appears to be flowing. We'll get into that a little more when I get to some rivers. You can also change the color of the water based on each of these regions. So the shape of how you lay them out might depend on that. Right now I'm using all, you can see in the right panel here, all of the ocean style. And that controls the color of the water, how much reflection, and how much visible movement there is. Okay. We'll go down this coast. We can fill in this part here. One of the other important aspects of water editing is right now I'm using the snap to sea level feature, which is here on the right side. This makes it really easy to draw large bodies of water that you want all at the same level. But again, when we get into rivers shortly, you'll want to be turning that off so you can make rivers that come down mountains and adjust more to the terrain. So we'll fill in a little bit more coast here. Put that down. And do another stretch out here. So you can see the Mediterranean coast and Mediterranean deep. Players of the game might we use those to designate passable and impassable water oftentimes. So the deep water is the blocked section. Alright, we'll just fill in a few remaining pieces here. And since this water is purely for visualization, it doesn't matter if you have where your points are. So as you'll see when we go back to terrain mode, you can't see any of those points. So now we've got some water. So we're going to clean up our coastline here a little bit. You can see the ocean water automatically moves up and down in a tidal pattern, but it gets a little flickering on edges where it's very close to the terrain. So by moving back into terrain mode, going to the raised terrain, and picking a slightly smaller, we're going to raise the coastline here a little bit to make it a little more clearly defined and fix some of those flickering issues. Probably going to go in here and add some marshland at a later point, but this is a good starting point for today. You can also see the circles here are kind of side effects of the brushes we used, so we'll probably clean those up a little bit so it's less noticeable. We have a couple noise brushes in here that, in addition to the round ones, allow us to add slightly more natural shapes. I'm going to go to 100 brush to make it a little more noticeable. Alright. Oh, we got a couple more over here. Put those in. We'll be doing a lot more tweaks on this as we go forth, but this is a good starting point. Alright, so our map is starting to take shape a little closer to what players might recognize. The next step we're going to do is add in a couple of the major rivers. There was one river that went down here, or at the starting point of the game. You may remember the city of Aegea sits on the southern bank. And there's also the Axios River that runs north this way up through this gap in the mountains. Went past Pella. So we're going to go add those in roughly. One of the tricks I like to do is to paint them on the map first. It gives me a little better idea as to where I'm carving them out. So I'm going to switch to the texture mode here and pick just a rich soil, which is a dark brown one which stands out well. Switch to my draw tool. That's about a good width for the river. So it's hard to see from the elevation of the terrain exactly where the river comes out, but it should be it's roughly in this area. So we're going to draw that on, and we can see some of the ridges here. The river will come through those. We'll bring it down here, join up to there. And it's a little easier to see up here. You can see the gap where the river comes through the mountains. So we'll paint that out and bring it down through the gap here and connect our two ends. Alright, so that's roughly the course of one of our rivers. You can see there. Now that won't show up on the strategy map yet because that is a just a painted texture. And we'll go rough out our other river, and that comes through this gap you can see in the mountains. Oftentimes particularly in elevated areas, it's fairly clear where the rivers go. So we're going to rough that in there, and then connect it to the sea. How about down here? Alright. Looks good. Okay, so starting with our first river, we're going to carve it out now. So going to the terrain mode, to our draw tool, we're going to right click in the water here. That will give us a draw height of minus 439, which would be good enough to carve out a river. And then we will start digging just by left clicking on the terrain. You can see the water shows up already in places where the water mesh extended to. Once we hit the end of it, all you can see is the trench we're digging. So we will go quickly through here, smooth that out. For now, while we're near the coast, we can just dig it all the way down to sea level. But as you get up into the mountains, we'll probably want to raise our river height a little bit. I'm going to actually want a slightly bigger brush. And usually the river should be a little wider down towards the where it meets the sea there. And dig that out. Because, of course, the NASA satellite data we started with used radar, it doesn't actually, the water levels show up the same height as the terrain around them. So sometimes identifying these rivers is a little tricky. You can use, as I said earlier, we use the Barrington Atlas of the Ancient World, which is a great reference for ancient Greece and Rome. But even Google Maps and stuff will be a great source of mapping information. So that's probably about far enough for now. So now that we've dug our trench, we're going to go fill in some water polys. So we'll switch over to the water mode. Now, see, you want all, in order to prevent seams or gaps in your water, it's good to connect them all up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this water region I made before just by selecting it in the middle here, hitting the delete key, and then switching to the draw tool. I'm going to add an extra corner in my water region there. Make it easier to connect the river up to. Let's line that up. Okay, and we will fill in our river here. Go fairly quickly. The size of these doesn't matter too much. Said the main difference is smaller ones are easier to wrap around corners. But for long straight sections of the river, it works well to make bigger sections of water. And we'll stop the mountain range here again. Okay, then we will just go through and make a few tweaks. We're going to switch this to river, which changes the color a little bit. And we're also going to rotate these using the rotate tool here, which I'm jumping to with the 3 key as a shortcut. Which allows me to make the river flow around the corners here. So if you're having problems with seams or the rivers going really sharp angles, then making more polygons like this with subtler changes in direction is a good way to handle that. Alright. Oh, we'll fill that in while we're... No, it's not quite finished yet. Alright, we zoom out. Now you can actually see the river on the strategy map because we have dug it out. We're going to do our one more river here, just to Pressure guys, so going to the train tool, or train mode and the draw tool, right click in the water is a good way to quickly get a deep brush. This river's a little narrower, so I'm going to pick a smaller brush here, and then we will dig it out. Nice curves in our river. Getting natural looking terrain is always one of the challenges and also one of the fun parts of working with the editor. It does help to do a little reading up on your geography to try to make things behave naturally. Even simple things like making sure your rivers actually flow downhill is one of the easy things to forget when you're editing. So we're going to, now that we're getting up to the mountains, we don't need to dig all the way down to sea level. So I'm going to right click and get we're down to about minus 300 here. And we'll carve that out. And let's go all the way up to 0. We don't want to deform the terrain too much around it. You can actually switch to the lowering tool, which will dig out a channel relative to the current height. Okay, that gives us a little bit of mountain terrain to work with. So going back to our water point, to the start, we'll switch to our water tool. We're at a pretty good point. We'll just narrow that in there and start creating our water. So we're going to go around this corner here. So at the moment we're still on the snap to sea level, so everything being placed is at 0 altitude. Now as we get into the mountain range here, we're going to turn that off. So now that we draw, it's going to place the water right under the cursor at on top of the map. So you'll see the water is now going up quite a bit, but we'll tweak that in a second. Draw out some more. And one more there for good measure. Alright, now we're going to clean that up a little bit because that does not look like the mountain stream we were intending. So switching to the move tool here and drag selecting, I've got both of these points now. So one of the tools on the right side at the bottom is level points. So that will make sure the 2 points you have selected are at the same altitude, so our river is not flowing sideways. And then we will drag it down. If we select these two, yeah, those are at height 0. So with these selected, we can look at the height on the right side here and make it slightly higher. Grab these two here, level them, bring it down, and so this way we can adjust it so that it's our river is coming slightly down from the mountains. Do those three at the same time. It's not too bad if we're a little into the mountains here. Straighten that out. And all those. Alright, so we've got a slightly more natural looking river there. You can see a couple of the side passages here that look like they might have been separate streams that flow into it. We're going to add a little one over here. We might need to carve that out a little bit more for it to show up. Some of the interesting things, you can create waterfalls and other neat water features here as well. Okay, so we're just going to have to carve that out a little bit more so you can actually see the water coming through. And we'll raise, That's way too big a brush. We'll raise that up on the sides there so it's a nice narrow stream. Okay, and switching back into the water, we'll go in and switch these modes. So that's going to be stream. We'll switch the direction of flow. Set that to stream as well. River. That flow down there towards the sea. That's river as well. And we're almost done. Alright, and then we're just going to quickly do a fields texture. Paint over those. So we get little muddy banks to our river. Switch to the mountain one here and get more rocky banks in the mountain part. And there we go, we got the start of our river. Coast we can blend where the sand versus dirt parts start. Alright, when we zoom back out to the strategy map, you can see we have two rivers. Alright, well that covers our basic terrain, editing, painting, and water parts of the map. If you've got any questions, please let us know in the forums, and we will be back soon with how to add movement regions, cities, buildings, trees, and more. Alright, thanks for joining us.